Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the nonlinear animator workflow. Let's get started. All right, so today we're going to be making this little animation using the nonlinear animation editor. And it can be a bit confusing, but if you just bear with me, I'm sure you'll get it and you'll be able to start using this in your own projects in really powerful ways. So we're actually going to start off by taking a look at a clip from a previous tutorial that I made. You may not have seen it already. If you haven't, it's from the Bounty Hunter's Den tutorial series. If you haven't watched that series, go check it out. It's got some amazing stuff in it. It's an entire series around how to create a scene in Blender. We create the whole scene in Blender, texture, animate, everything. And then we bring it over into Unreal Engine 4 and make it look exactly the same. And then we turn it into a VR experience so that you can make VR using Blender and Unreal. It's really great. Check it out. Very much worth your time. You can also check out on the Blender Market. We now have it as a product you can buy. You get the all the episodes without ads, plus you get all the project files, including the Unreal project files. So you can pick them apart and figure out how the VR scene was made and tweak it for your own purposes. So now also just as a reminder, if you'd like to learn how to make this little droid, we do have a series of tutorials on the channel for, I'm using Wii all the time. Like it's just me, you know, it's not like someone else here. Want to learn how to make this little robot? I've got 2 tutorials on the channel about how to do that. So how to model and texture and then rig this guy. You can check that out. If you want to skip those and just get right into animation, you can check out the link in the description to the Gumroad page where you can just buy this model pre-rigged, ready to go, and jump in from there. So check that out if you're interested. Now, before we get started, I'll just talk about the windows that are important. Now, if you remember, so the timeline everyone's familiar with, if I select an object, hit I to make a keyframe, let's say a location keyframe, you get a little keyframe in your timeline. And so you can create animation. And this is usually how we work when we're just creating animation. We just do it all in here. You can click the little tiny arrow to get this extra menu, and you can do a drop down to show you all the different things that are going on. And this looks just like the dope sheet, which is the other one that's really important. So we come to the dope sheet right here. Dope sheet gives us the same view with a few different selections up here in our menu. And we can do a lot of cool stuff in the dope sheet. Now, what's important for you using the nonlinear animator, we're going to be using the dope sheet. We're going to be using, bring this up. It's going to get really tiny up here. Where is it? Nonlinear animation window. And in the dope sheet window, we're going to switch down from dope sheet. We're going to switch this to action editor. And action editor is going to allow us to create some specific actions, which will make sense in a minute. So these are the main windows that you have: the dope sheet, the action editor, and the nonlinear animator whenever you're working in this flow. So let's take a look at this clip from this previous tutorial, and then we'll jump into our droid and talk about how we can apply it there. All right, so we've got no animation in our scene whatsoever. Let's find out what happens if we make some. So let's take our cube and let's hit I for a keyframe. Frame 50, grab up, and hit I again. Okay, so I've got a simple animation. Now, what happened when we did that? It's created this thing called cube action in the action editor. So nothing really has happened in the dope sheets, just kind of showed us what the keyframes are. I can open up my summary and it shows me everything that we've done. The action editor here has created this thing called cube action. If I go to my dropdown, you can see there's no other things in the action editor. And then up here in the NLA, we've got this thing. It's like a orange bar with 2 dots. What is that? And it says cube action, N cube, right? So this name, of course, is corresponding with the action, which makes sense. And this is corresponding with the object, which makes sense. You can see the same information's here, cube action and cube. Great, fine. Let's see what happens if we make a new animation. So I'll go forward to frame 80 and we'll grab him on the X over here and I'll hit I. Cube action's developed a bit. It's got another keyframe here. I could actually open this up. You can see it's looking exactly like our dope sheet. Let's say I create a new object. I'll create a plane. I'll scale it up. Okay, and what's happened? I've created this new object and I've selected it. Well, you can see that this is still up here. This hasn't changed. But of course, we don't see any keyframes here or here anymore. Mostly because, we've got selected turned on, right? If I turn off isolate or only show me what's selected, then it's going to show me everything that's animated in the dope sheet. But it doesn't show me everything that's animated in the action editor. So the action editor is more specific, okay? Now, in my drop-down option, I've got my action up here, cube action, which is this guy, all right? So let's just set a keyframe for this plane. We get I to set a keyframe, and on frame 105 for our plane. And maybe we'll scale this one up. I'll head into the keyframe for scale. And what's happened? Well, okay, we've got a new layer here on a nonlinear action editor for plane, and we've created automatically made a new action called plane action. And let me scale it up. and I'll move forward first. Frame 150, I'll scale it up, hit I, boom, we got a new keyframe. And okay, so our animation's playing like we would expect it to. And now we got this new action. We'll check out my dropdown. I've got cube action and plane action. Interesting. Okay, so let's deselect everything. I will select my cube again, right? And I could keep adding on to my cube animation, but let's try like, changing the visibility setting, right? So over here on my filters, I'm going to turn on render and viewport. And for cube, I'm going to hit I and I for that, and then I'll move forward and I'll turn them off so I make it disappear. And what happens there? Okay, so again, it adds it to cube action. So every time you add animation to an object, when you're working in this way, it's just going to keep piling it into whatever the action is associated with that object that it's created. So what is an action? An action it's a chunk of animation that's saved for an object. Well, it's not even that. It's a chunk of animation that's just saved. So it's not even really has to be related to an object. We can rename them and stuff. So let's go to our cube, and I'm going to call this move up, over, and off. All right, so because that's what happens to this, right? Now, check this out. I can select my object here, my plane, and now I've got plane action selected. If I select this and hit play, now my plane is going to be inheriting that animation. So I could take my cube, and with cube selected, I could switch to plane action. And now cube's just going to scale up. So you can see what's happened is it's actually taken the animation data from that we've saved, and it's applied it to the new object. And that's really, really powerful. Stashing it is like, I don't want to use this now, I want to save it for later. Pushing it down means I want this to happen here just like I've animated it. I want it to be in my scene. Let's see what happens when we push down. So I click push down, and boom, it moves from this down to this. So this track is the action editor itself. So whatever animation you've got stored in here is in the action editor. When I push it down, it leaves the action editor, okay? And it goes into an NLA track, which is basically like a layer. And you can create a lot of these. So I could assign plane action, or actually let's even just make a new one. So I'm going to click new, and I'm going to be ahead of Blender. And so instead of letting it create one for me when I add keyframes, I'm just going to create a new action with no keyframes. And I'm going to call this rotate. And I want this to rotate my cube. So I'll go to my transform settings here, and I'll hit an I for my first keyframe. I'll rotate like that, and then I'll hit another I. So now he's going to rotate as he flies around. Okay. And so now what I can do is I can push down this one, and it's created a new NLA track for me. Now what's cool about it is I can drag this around. So I could say, actually, I want the rotate to start at the beginning. So I'm going to move it right to here. So now he rotates and slides off. Here we are back with our little droid. He's got his little peppy walk going on. He's looking happy. Life is good. So now let's apply what we just looked at with the nonlinear editor and the action editor, and let's see how it looks for him. So we've created these keyframes. They're just living in our timeline. If I open up my summary for my droid rig in pose mode and select all my bones, you can see that in the timeline, I've just got these are just the raw keyframes that we made. We haven't done anything with the action editor. So if I come down and I'll just create a little bit more room, I'll switch this to the dope sheet, and I'll make sure that the only show selected is turned off, just so that all my keyframes are visible in case I need to see them. And I'm going to pull this up here, and I'm going to switch over to, first I'll go to the action editor. So dope sheet, action editor. So it's all the same, but I'm just going to label this, all right? Because right now we've got this drop-down menu, and this is the action that we've just animated. So this little walk cycle. You could just keep this, and just animate everything for your whole scene right here in the timeline, but we're going to try and use actions. So we can reuse stuff like walk cycles. Okay, so I'm going to come right here, droid rig action, and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it droid walk cycle. Okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my non-linear. Actually, I'll keep them all up so you can see what's happening, even though it makes it really small up here to see what our little guy looks like. But I'm going to go to the non-linear animation editor. Sorry, and you can see here droid walk cycle. That's what we've just named it. It also updates it here as well in our dub sheet, so we can see what the action is called. Now I'm going to turn this into a strip that I can reuse. So I'm going to push it down. You can click this button to push it down, or you can click here. It's the same thing. So you can see if you hover your mouse over, you get the tooltip push down action. So I'll push down this action, and now I've got my droid walk cycle action in my NLA track. Now, if I delete this, okay, I'll just delete it. We don't have any animation in our scene now, but we haven't actually lost it, because if I do my drop down menu, you can see droid walk cycle is still here. Just bear in mind, it's a little 0 next to it. It's not assigned to anything, and we haven't protected this data block. So if I was to quit Blender now and then reopen it, we would lose that walk cycle. So you need to make sure it's assigned to something, or we need to protect the data block. So let's see. The other thing you can do is in the NLA track, you can hit Shift A to add, or come up here to the add menu. You can add an action strip, and it'll give you the list of all the action strips, and we can bring it back in. So this way we can add multiple things in. When I select my droid walk cycle strip, and I come over to the strip tab, if you scroll all the way down to this bottom bit here, action clip, you've got some really useful features. Probably one of the most useful one here is repeat. And you can see it's set to 1 at the moment. If I drag this forward, it's basically going to continue. It's going to cycle and loop this animation over and over and over again. Let me give us a little more room. I'm going to go to my timeline. I'm going to take the end of my timeline, drag it out. So if I play this now, you can see it's just going to continue walking. He's going to repeat that action that we've animated. What we can do with this now is, we can animate the controller, right? So the main controller for where it controls like his total location. We can move him forward. So let's do that. I'm going to come here, and I'm actually going to create this as another action. Okay. So I'm going to open up my action editor down here. And I'm going to click new, and I'm going to call this move forward. I'll just start at frame 0, and I'll come right here to this main controller, and I'll set a keyframe. I'll also do it just in the window by hitting I. I'll just do one for the location for this, and I will come forward a little bit to like frame 40, grab him on the Y, bring him over here, hit I, and set a new keyframe for location. So now I've got my move forward action right here. And I'm going to go ahead and push that down. So now this is another action. Okay, so now let's say we want our robot to come to a stop right here. And we want him to kind of have this idle animation, let's say. Well, let's create an idle animation. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my droid walk cycle is not influencing his current shape, his current position. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to take my repeat, and I'm going to turn it. I'll just turn it off. I'll go back to 1 with that, right? So now he's going to walk forward, and right about here is where I want him to kind of begin to take us a sort of a hold pose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that pose, and then I can create a new strip out of it, and then I can actually blend between these two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here to my down here to my action editor. I'm going to click new, and I'm going to type in hold pose. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is reset my character back to his rest pose. So I can come up here to pose and go clear transform all, and that will put it back to his rest pose. And we can create a little bit of animation for this. So I'm going to, let's see, I'll select all, and then I'll box select, deselect the master controller, because I don't want to put any keyframes on that. I just want to put keyframes on all these guys. So I'm going to hit I, and I'm going to put a keyframe for the whole character, but selected bones only. I'll come forward a little bit, and he jumps forward because of the fact that we have the move forward animation here, which has moved this master control forward. By not putting a keyframe on him, it moves him back to this position. So I'm gonna just take this and maybe grab it down, maybe grab the look control a little bit, hit all, I'll deselect that, I'll hit I, and I'll whole character, set a keyframe for the whole character. Come forward a little bit more, and maybe back up. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just come up here and I'll select the top keyframe in the hierarchy, Shift D, and drag it forward. All right, I might expand those a little bit, give him a little bit of a slower breathe pose, even though droids don't breathe. Technicality. There you go. So got this kind of just nice slight hover to him. All right, cool. So now what I want to do is we're going to take this and we're going to push him down. So the hold pose. So now we've got a hold pose. You can see there he is. He's doing a little hold. But now if you watch, like we got some weird stuff going on. He moves forward, he animates, he stops, he freezes, then he reappears back here. It's kind of a bit messy. It's like, why is this all so crazy? Well, we need to start organizing our layers in terms of hierarchy and in terms of what's important and how it works. So first thing, let's take our droid walk cycle and let's expand it out. I'm going to repeat it a little bit. There we go. And you can see what's happening is that hold pose is kind of dominating. It takes over. As soon as hold pose starts, we jump right back into here and every, all the keyframes and stuff that we've set dominate. Like they override everything that comes below. Now, if I was to take this, let's add in, I'm going to add another NLA track by hitting, Shift A. And let's see, I'm going to grab these guys and I'll move this one up. Actually, I'll create another one so I'll get a little more room. I'll move this one up and I'll move this one. Is it going to let me move it up? No, I got to go around it like that. All right, so now walk cycle is above hold pose. Watch what happens. Walking, and now nothing's happening. We're not seeing any of hold pose until walk cycle stops. But now, look, we're not getting any animation at all out of hold pose. This can be really, really confusing when you first start out because you create an animation and you're like, why is it not working now that it's underneath? It's like, I've created this animation. It can be really frustrating. It all has to do with the active strip. So if you go to the strip tab, you have to set each strip to how you want it to basically interpret that strip once it finishes. So right here, extrapolation and blending, these two options are really important. So extrapolation is set to hold. That means that when we come to the end of this strip, it's going to hold that pose indefinitely, right? And that's what happens. You can see that pose holds indefinitely. Blending mode is set to replace. That means that whatever is happening here has to replace whatever comes below it. So no matter what animation is below us, this is going to replace it. So with these two settings set, basically, if this is above other animation, you're never going to see any of that other animation if it happens after it. However, if we take this and we go, all right, nothing. When we get to the end, it's not going to hold it. It's just going to turn off those position keyframes. You can see it automatically switches to this one. And now let's change replace. Let's change replace to combine. And it's hard to see because this is such a subtle animation. But it's basically combining the two. Remember, all the animation is this up and down motion, so we can't really see it. Let's go back to replace. Oh, you can see a subtle difference. There we go. So when I switch from replace to combine, you can see he drops down a little bit. Remember, that's the animation for hold pose. So with combine set, it's always going to combine whatever is this with whatever's below it. We can still go back to replace though, because the other one here is blend in and out. If I go blend out, if I drag this up, you're going to get this little diagonal line that starts to appear. And you can see, look, what happens is it crosses my playhead. He starts to change his position. So think of this as like a fade, right? In an editing program, you put a fade on one clip, it fades, transitions to the other clip. You can extend how long that fade happens. This is fading one animation into the other. So we're now fading droid walk cycle into the hold pose. So now let's start getting this to make a bit of sense. Move forward. We want him to stop and stay in this position. So we want to keep this hold forward and we want to keep this set to replace because we want him to always be here, right? So that's fine. We don't have to touch move forward. Let's take droid walk cycle and let's get it to match the timing of move forward. So I'm going to come here, scroll all the way down, and I'll take repeat and I'll just drag repeat down until it matches like that. Okay. And now I'm going to take hold pose and I'm going to drag it so that it overlaps with that fade transition. So with all of these things together, what you end up with is a really powerful set of tools that we can use to create all kinds of animation and more importantly, reuse animation. So I could take this hold pose and, let's say he starts to walk again, so pause here, and then I want him to start walking again. I can just click on whatever track I want it. So I want it to override hold pose. So it's going to slowly replace hold pose. So I'm going to put it above hold pose. So I'll click here and Shift A to add. You can see I've got my selections here. What do I want to do? I'm going to go for my walk cycle. And I'm going to click here. One easy thing too, as well, is you can turn auto blend in and out. This will automatically set your blend in and blend out based on what's beneath it. So now you can see it's automatically going to transition based on the overlap there. Now he starts walking again. And I can take this walk cycle and let's extend it out. And I'll bring my timeline out. Just going to find my timeline. Give us some more frames here. Back over to the dope sheet action editor. And I can create a new, I don't want to use this move forward again, because if I use this one, actually, I want to expand move forward. I want to make it, I want to edit by adding more keyframes, right? But if I go in here and I go into edit mode to add keyframes to this track, to this action, and I select my object and hit I and set a keyframe for location, I get this error, keying set failed to insert any keyframe. So why is that? Well, it's because this strip stops here. I need to actually extend the length of this strip. If I do it here, it's actually, this has actually changed the speed of the strip. So if I move this end, the active strip, the first one, if I move this up, you can see it's actually using the keyframe information we had in this original action, but it's just slowing it all down and spreading it out, which we don't want. So we don't want to affect the keyframes that are already in there. So I'll go into edit mode. You can do this out of edit mode, doesn't really matter. But if I drag this second one down here under action clip, if I drag this out, this will expand the amount of time that this action lasts for. So now I can add a keyframe right around here where I want it. So I can hit I, location, and then I can come forward as he walks, grab him forward on the Y, and let's hit I and location. He's not quite going far enough, so I'll take him a little bit further. See how that looks. Yeah, perfect. Great. Now if I hit tab to exit edit mode while I'm in the NLA editor, you can see that the keyframes disappear from the action editor. I don't have the action selected anymore. And now the move forward action has more animation in it. And because we have it set to hold forward and replace, it's just overriding any information that's below it that has to do with this particular bone, because this is the only bone that has keyframes on it, right? So this is the only bone that's being overridden right now by move forward. Now, if I was to come in and change that, right? So if I go into edit mode and grab, let's say, the look controller and like have him look up, right? And set a keyframe there for the location for that bone, and then exit edit the edit, you can see that it takes over any keyframe information we have below it. So walk cycle and hold pose both have keyframe data for the look controller, but it's just getting erased because of what we've got move forward set to. Now, if we change it from replace to combine, then it's going to combine the two. If we set it to add, it will add the two. So there are ways of getting it to behave where it's going to interact with the other ones. But typically speaking, you just want to be a little careful about that and make sure that you don't end up with keyframes on things that you don't need. So if I come back into edit mode, delete those keyframes, now you can see it goes back to normal. Now we could, use this right to our advantage. So I can click new and let's create a look around action strip. And let's grab this guy and maybe bring it over here and hit I and set a keyframe there for the location. Move forward and maybe bring it over here. I, location, come forward over here. I, location. And now if I push this strip down and we make sure it's set to hold and replace, then it's going to override any information we've got below it. So if I go back into move forward and we do what we did again, so I move this back up and hit I for location, and now I exit edit mode, you can see that goes away. But if I switch this to add, it's going to come back. So you can see it's influencing it because it's looking at what's below it. So I hope that makes sense, the way the stack works. Probably the most confusing part is when you get to the end of a strip, and if you've got it set to hold and you don't realize it, So I could set this to nothing, right? And then, so it doesn't jump like that. Also, I'll get rid of this keyframe because it's a bit silly. I can turn on my blend out, right? And that'll slowly fade off his look. So there you go. So now you can see that all these things together really start to create a bit of a powerful system, because you can create a library of actions for a character and you can save them, and then you can use them whenever you want. You can, mix between them and have them affect each other in really powerful ways, so that you can create really nice, nuanced animation without, getting too complicated when you're creating your individual actions. So I hope you found this really helpful and that you learned a few things, and that you can take this and apply it for yourself and make some really cool animation in your own projects. So thanks again for watching. Please remember to like this video if you enjoyed it, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think and ask any questions you've got. I try to read everyone's comments. I get back to most of them. And thanks again for checking out the Patreon and joining the channel. I'll catch you in the next tutorial. Until then, have a fantastic week. I will catch you later. See ya. Bye.